So yesterday we really dove into CSS grids in a big way. We also played with some animations. We played with transitions, transforms. Um, you know, as I mentioned with the animations and stuff, like I don't use those very often, but your mileage may vary. I just wanted to introduce that as an opportunity so that you could see how that could be used in the context of web development. But then we spent quite a bit of time playing with grids, and grids are very important. They are useful. It's much better than the old ways of doing stuff. But today, with the final day of our week, we're going to kind of blast through a bunch of different concepts that are unrelated. Mostly for the same sort of thing we were talking about yesterday, which is familiarity that they exist. So these are things that are probably going to come up from time to time. You just have to be aware, like when someone says area, for example, they're talking about accessibility functions inside of HTML. So we're going to go over a couple of these from high level. I also want to set aside some time. Maybe we'll play a round or two of Kahoot like we did last week. And then leave some opportunity for some questions or some exploration at the end, leading into, we've got kind of a 3 days before our next class. And the homework for tonight is a pretty big project compared to what we've been doing before. Okay, so where are we at? We're also going to be releasing, as a part of the homework tonight, CSS Grid Garden, which is going to be very similar to the Froggy. So you'll have a couple of things to do between now and Monday. All right, the very first thing, this is a super fun feature. I've been using it for almost 15 years now, is favicons. So you notice up at the top in any of your tabs, you've got this little icon up there, right? And the products we've been building so far, if we go live on this website, by default, it's just got kind of a generic globe icon. That means that we haven't set a favicon. Every single website can set favicons, and then when we learn about this in JavaScript, this is one of the things that as you're building apps or building products, a great example of this is Gmail, perhaps, right? So if you look at my Gmail tab here, it's got a little 0, but if I had unread messages there, it would change that to 1 and change it to 2. So you can add some interactivity in your favicons by being able to swap them in and out as we go. So what is a favicon? By default, the favicon concept stands for favorite icon, and it was created originally, I think, by Internet Explorer way back in the day, like IE4, when we had a favorites menu, right? Almost every browser now calls this a bookmarks menu, but when Internet Explorer invented this, they called it favorites. And so rather than having a list of just items here, because it used to be just a drop-down menu, they wanted to have a way to visually distinguish what those favorites were. And so they originally made a very simple, let's just download a favicon real quick. Free favicon download. Okay. We'll use this little pencil maybe. Download. Oh, I don't want to register. No. Let's there we go. Let's grab one of these. All right, we're gonna get this cool dragon. All right, download. Cool. So when we're in here, all right, the default is favicon.ico, right? So it's an icon, and if we put this favicon ico in our root directory of any of our projects, so in this one we're in the activity tracker thing we built. If I simply drag this favicon ico in the same top level, I have to extract that folder first, don't I? Yep. Extract all. Great. If I just drag this, shoot, why is it default to that view? It's so stupid. View, content, details. I want details. So if I drag this favicon ico in here, when our browser makes the request, behind the scenes, the browser is smart enough to say, I want index.html and all the stuff that goes with it. But it will also say, hey, do you have favicon.ico in your top level folder? Okay, so if we have this, and we load our page, right, you'll notice that now I've got this little dragon flag that's up there, okay? That's the first version. It happens by magic. So if you have a favicon.ico in here, it exists. Now there are other ways, especially in the meta, or in the head area, right? We can use the link mechanism that we've been doing to link in style sheets, and we can say link rel equals shortcut icon. What are all the ones we have here? Let's see. Favicons link tag. Right, there are a couple attributes we need to be aware of because they're all pretty useful. Yeah, link rel equals shortcut icon, and then it has an href. Yeah, href equals favicon.ico. Okay, so doing this up here tells the browser to use this. Okay, there are a whole bunch of other versions that we might want to use as we're building better apps, because as you noticed in this little folder that we have here, we have a 32 by 32 version, a 16 version. Some of the things that mobile phones do specifically, like if you add a website to your home screen so that it shows up there, it will. If one of these is defined, it's going to use that as the icon for the app, right? So, let's say default favicon link tags to use on websites, right? And it takes us to a W3 thing here. It's going to show us. Let's go to W3 schools and see what they say. Wait, no, good. And we'll just go favicons. Right? There are a couple different. So we can specify the sizes that we want it to be used for. So if an iPhone, for example, when you drag it to the home screen, the browser, the mobile Safari that's on your phone, if you're using an iPhone, or Chrome if you're using Android, is going to say, I would love to use a 32 pixel wide image. And so if you've provided that in this link attribute here, you can have a really beautiful little icon that would appear on the page. So we probably want to include a few different sizes, and we would come in here and do this, and we will say, let's add all the ones we've got. Right, so we've got a 16, a 32, and then you can see here that it also includes a 512 and a 192 if we wanted to use it for Android, and then they have an Apple Touch icon as well. Right, so we're going to pull all these over here, and what I generally would probably do with these type of icons is maybe put them in the images folder. But what I'll do is I'll come in here and say, what was the name of those files? Let's see, favicon 16.png, and then I'm going to change the type to image PNG instead of image GIF. And then I would do the same thing over and over again, right? So I'll go link rel, okay, 32, and then we'll say size 32 by 32, okay? And then there are special ones for touch icons, so let's look that up. Google favicon link tag for Android. Right. Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of different ones that you can use and mix and match. So whatever images that you have available to you, you can come in here and define it so that if the browser or the device or the mobile phone or the iPad or whatever says, I want to use this size of image, we will have an answer for them, right? Oftentimes when I'm working on websites and stuff, we'll generally use like 3 or 4 different sizes because it's easy for whoever's making your logos to give you a small, a medium, a large. But the two important things to note is by default, you get the free one, which is favicon.ico. Your browser's going to try and load that regardless, even if we didn't put it in our head in the link, right? So before we added this in here, it still loaded it. Behind the scenes, it's still making that request. But as we define these, and we say, hey, link rel is icon, use this image, right? Oh, we need to put this in images, right? Got to make sure our path is correct. If for some reason your device or your browser said, give me one that's 32 wide, we could do that, right? And we could do any number of things, right? We could even have different images in here. Another thing that's important to note is that if, when we do want to start changing these with JavaScript, it's pretty useful to go in here and add an ID, right, to whatever your main one is. So you can say link ID equals favicon, right? So that when we do JavaScript, we want to change it out, make it flash, do whatever we need to do, we can swap that out this way, okay? Any questions about favicons? It's a really cool way. I mean, when you start working on your portfolio, you can see my website that we've looked at a few times. I have EH, my initials, as my favicon. I spent 0 time working on this, right? You can be as creative. You got a very tiny little area to work with, so your mileage may vary. There's also a really cool website, favicon.com. That's not it. I think I linked it here. Oh yeah, here we go. This website, which lets you take any image file and convert it into those different formats. So if we were to pick, let's pick a picture of myself somewhere here. Yeah, probably pictures. No, yeah, right. So I'm gonna upload a me. And, I can't use that file format. That's annoying. All right. Well, you can upload an image that's in GIF, JPG, PNG format, BMP, and this will convert it into a .ico for you, right? So this tool is pretty useful, and you could probably find 100 tools like this if you were to go to Google and you search for Let's see, like generate favicon.ico from image. Right? Right. And you could, let's see if this one will work. Where was it at? Downloads. Okay. So now I have created all of those different file formats and all those sizes as a picture of myself, right? So we could just as easily swap those all out in our project we were working on. If I can find my folder where I was in. Extract all. Yep. Replace, yes. And so now, wait, that's the old one. I must have opened the wrong file. Crap. Oh, here we go. Extract all. Yeah. So now I have, I could put myself as a part of our website, right? And if we go to our, you can see that it changed to a little picture of my head, right? It's pretty easy to work with. I would recommend, at a minimum, always have a favicon.ico in your root level, because a lot of browsers are going to look for that by default. And then it's generally best practice to at least include a 16 pixel wide one and a 32 pixel wide one. If you're working on Amazon or some website that is expected to be used by everybody on the planet with every browser and device, they probably use 40 or 50 of these, right? They probably define, hey, if you're using a Microsoft Windows Phone and you're one of like the 4 people that use Microsoft Windows Phone, here's the icon for you, right? Any questions on that? Favicons. It's pretty simple, but it's neat, and we might play with that, especially if we start building apps like a fitness tracker and things like that, or if we build a chat tool, right? We might want to have a little bubble flash so that if this is in the background of our page, like we're not on this tab, we want to let it know that there's some activity over here. Cool. All right, up next, we're going to talk about area. Now, area we could spend a 12-week course going over all of the area possibilities and what that means for us when we're building accessible products. What you should be aware of with area is that area was first implemented as a framework, kind of in between modern web development and what we used to have. So when we were talking about accessibility, before semantic HTML existed, and we had all these excellent tags like header, navigation, all these different things that make it easier for visually impaired people to use the internet. Area came about as a standards organization that says we're going to add a whole bunch of extra attributes so that any browser or any device that needs to take advantage, if you're blind, if you're on a Braille terminal and you're reading little bumps, these area roles will define how the product should look, right? Because we have a whole bunch of HTML tags in our structure that are there for presentation purposes only. Like we'll wrap something in a div, or we'll make a bunch of flexbox stuff. But someone who's got a disability of any kind, they're really just there for the content, right? They want to interact with the website. They want to interact with, if there's a form to upload, apply for a job is a great example, right? Blind people need to be able to apply for jobs as well. And so they're going to use a device that understands area standard and knows what to do with it. And so there are a whole bunch of things that exist in here. I mean, this is an entire specification of, it stands for the accessible rich internet applications. It's all of these attributes. There's hundreds of these, right? And it gives us the power as developers to make our products more accessible. Now, it's the same usual caveats apply. If you're working for Amazon, if you're working for Google, some place that is being used by the maximum number of people, you're probably going to use area attributes all over the place, especially if you want to be a forward-thinking company, right? You might actually build a lightweight version of a product as an MVP, and then you reach some critical threshold, and maybe you've made an email client like Gmail, and some blind person sends in a help desk ticket and says, my screen reader is not working correctly. Can you help me? Area is almost always the tool that you'd have to reach for first. Now, a lot of this is going to be used in conjunction with the good semantic development that we've been learning up till now. So you're going to want to do both in a lot of places. But this standard specification is massive, right? There's a whole bunch of things in here and a whole bunch of complexity, and I do not encourage you to memorize everything. We're going to point out a few of the ones that are most important, but this set of standards, right, can do a lot. Great. So there's a whole bunch of tutorials in here that are really excellent to work through. We're probably, in the interest of time and not spending an entire day or entire week on area, just be aware that this exists. So if you search for area, you're probably going to come to the Mozilla website. This is a really great resource. They've got a whole bunch of tutorials in here for if you need to make your website accessible to the visually impaired, the hearing impaired, someone who's got, maybe missing a limb and doesn't have a mouse, right? How do they navigate a website if they can't use a mouse, right? These are real problems that you will face at some point in your careers. For those of you who've expressed an interest or a desire in working in the government, either in cybersecurity or in the military or at one of the three-letter agencies, all government products that are being developed for consumer use by law under Section 508 have to be accessible to people with disabilities. It's like under the same broad spectrum of guidelines for the Americans with Disability Act. So when I was working in the government, all of my products that I built had to conform to a lot of these standards. And so this is a big standard, right? We didn't do everything in here, but we had to at least make accommodations for meeting them halfway, right? We couldn't build a website that would not work on a screen reader, for example, right? We had to build something that did a bit of both. So we really just want to be aware that this is something that you'll do. Now, what are the things that you're going to do most frequently? Oftentimes, some of the biggest things that you can do in terms of using accessibility on area is you're going to want to make it for the interactive elements, the forms, if you're building a product, like all the buttons that are being clicked, right? Because if someone comes and they're visually impaired, their screen reader is going to read out all the content of the page, but they have to know which things are interactive, which things can they click on. And a lot of these area attributes are going to provide extra context around our inputs that tell the screen reader what is required and what is not, right? So here's a simple example that you can read here. I'll make it a little bit bigger. Right, we've been playing with forms. This is a form. It takes a first name, a last name, and a street address, right? But what we've done is we've used the area required attribute and said, hey, this one has to be filled in. So does this one. The street address does not. This is missing that attribute. So if someone came in here and was visually impaired and was using some kind of screen reader, their screen reader is smart enough to say, this is a form, you must provide first name and last name. There is an optional field for street address, right? So it's going to give them those kind of indicators. And it's really hard to demo because I don't have any screen readers and I'm not visually impaired. So it's just a good idea to know that this exists. So that's one of them. Area required is one of the more useful things. You're probably going to use it pretty frequently on your inputs. Another one is when we've been working with labels, right? We've been working with labels on our inputs, right? So the label element is an excellent element and should be used in conjunction with this area labeled by field, right? And what the area labeled by field lets us do is say, this other field over here, and it doesn't have to be a label, right? It allows us to do things incorrectly and still be useful to people with disabilities. So we can say, hey, my billing ID is one of the labels for this form element. My name ID is also a label for this form element. So when we're using a label tag, like we were doing before, we can only have one label for each element. But what the area labeled by field attribute lets us do is use multiple, right? So we can say the form itself is billing, and the field of this input is name. And so you can have multiple things in here, right? You might even put in, like, if you made a big application, right? We were doing the fitness tracker. We might say that this track exercise field, the label for it is activity tracker up here at the top. So the screen reader is smart enough. If I was blind and it was reading this off to me, it would say, I'm on FitWizard program loaded, activity tracker form, please enter your activity, right? That's the kind of thing that these area attributes will let us do. What are some other ones that we might use occasionally? Certainly some of the ones about roles, right? Because before we got the HTML5 semantic tags like section, header, content, nav, menu, all of those new semantic tags have really bridged the gap for what area was trying to do in the first place, but there are still attributes that exist to tell the screen reader the section of the page that you're on, so that a smart screen reader, the user can say, hey, read me all of my options for navigation, and it will immediately read all those options, or tell me what's in the content, tell me what's in the article. And so there is an area role. How do I find a structuring? Let's look at structuring. We're in the wrong page. Area. Here we go. Here's some videos we can look at. Right, so this is like a really good example, right? This is how we've been structuring our HTML up till now. We've made a list of links that are going to chapter 1, chapter 2, and then there's a quiz. A screen reader does not know what this looks like visually, right? They can't see that these are tabs. So to us, it looks perfect. We built this beautiful tool. But with Area, we can come in here and say, role is a tab, and now your screen reader is going to tell that individual that this is a tab and it's used for navigation or for selecting between two sets of content. The role attribute you'll probably want to use regardless of if you're using really, really well-defined semantic HTML. So let's look at all the roles that we could possibly use. Is there a, yep. Area roles list. Right? And so the ones that I use most frequently are going to be like structural, right? So it'll be like, this is the document, this is a list, navigation, this is our main content, right? So if we wanted to build in a search box, we might say this is the search role. And so all of those things, when we're defining our structure of our pages, just to come in here and make it real, we might come in here and say, okay, so let's say banner, right? So we'd start at the top, banner. And we know that we can use that role, so we'd come in here and say role equals banner. And just by including this, we've now told any future visually impaired person that everything between this two tag here is just kind of our heading, right? It's going to be a logo up there. It's going to be the name of the company. Down here, we would probably say role, and we could choose either menu or navigation. Yeah, let's use navigation. So we'll say role navigation. Down here, we'll say role equals main, or in this case, because we're building an application, yeah, main is probably the best, right? So the role attribute is one I encourage you to use structurally anyway, right? Even though we're still using correct HTML that is semantic and has some content behind it, think of your random visually impaired person. They might be using an older browser because that's the product they're most familiar and comfortable with, and so they might be a few versions behind. Their browser might not know what a section tag is, right? But by providing this attribute, it's taken us an extra 3 seconds as a developer, but you just might have made your product accessible to someone who's got a disability. So I would strongly encourage you to start incorporating some of these some of the area labeled by, some of the area, some of those attributes where it makes sense, because it's going to save you a lot of headache and frustration later on, and it's just good practice to get into, right? We want to build products for everybody, not just for ourselves and not just for us, people that have standard kind of normal, typical eyes, ears, hands, right? We're building for everyone. Any questions on area? Like, you can see there's a whole bunch of roles here. This is just the roles mechanism, right? There's a whole bunch of attributes: area labeled by, area required, area optional. There are a bunch of things that you can do for specific widgets, like if this is a search box, if this is a list of results. And then I would also encourage you to just come in here and watch some of these videos, right? See what it's like for someone who's got a disability or some kind of impairment that makes it more difficult for them to use the things that we take for granted. And then, just to reiterate, like if you go into a government type of engineering job, you might actually be required by law to build your products to conform to these standards. Okay? Any questions? No? All right. It was interesting that Schuster brought this up today. We're going to talk briefly about search engine optimization. Now, unfortunately, this is one of those things that this could itself be another 12-week course. There are very well-paid consultants that will love to come into your company and tell you all the things you can do to be better at Google. We've kind of touched on this a little bit briefly. Google is the 200-pound gorilla that is in the room and smashes its way into doing things. Most people will optimize as best they can for Google, and Google does provide some really good Google SEO tips, right? Right? They provide a starter's guide that gives you a whole bunch of things that make it easier for Google to spider your products, spider your websites, and take a look at, so that you show up in search results correctly. You could spend weeks and weeks and weeks doing everything they say in here, and then Google might decide next month to change how their search engine works, and everything you've done is broken. That has happened like 14 times over the last 20 years that I've seen and been a part of. Google has at times changed their search engine, how it selectively indexes websites, and killed entire companies. There was a company called Mahalo that was kind of trying to be like a for-profit version of Wikipedia, where people would like write an article, and if they wanted to be like the resource that was most trusted on the internet. It was a really cool business idea, and what was cool about them was that in order to get all the people on the planet to write these articles and create this content, that anytime your article was viewed, you got a portion of that ad revenue. So they had a really interesting business concept, and they were in business for 3, 4, 5 years, and they ranked very highly in Google search results. They were doing all the things that were perfect to do at the time, told by Google, that got you to be the #1 result for how to clean a fish, right? So that whenever you search Google for how to clean a fish, you'd go to a Mahalo website. But Google released an update called the Panda update, for whatever reason, and all of a sudden, all their pages that had been working for years disappeared from disappeared from the top couple pages in Google, right? So all of this stuff can change from time to time, and it can negatively impact you in your job and business if you're building websites that are meant to be reached on Google, right? If 80% of your web traffic comes from Google, I'd be very scared that Google's going to change something that breaks it. Now, there are a few useful rules, and we probably want to go over them. These are like generic rules of thumb that if you follow this, at the very least, you're not doing any harm to yourself, right? So the first is having a good page title. We've been playing with this whole time. We're putting a title in here that is useful. Some of the you don't want to go crazy. Like it used to be best practice to put every possible keyword in your title that you could. So you'd be like, you'd come in here and you'd say something like fitness tracker, right? Weight loss, right? Because older search engines, before they've made these updates and changes, took the title attribute to be like, this is super important. Whatever the title is, we want to make sure that you can find it when you're searching for it, right? So that used to be one thing you do. But now the general advice is just have a really good title. Whatever your page is, make that title be the thing, right? So if we, in our example with our fitness tracker here, right, we had built a few pages. It says, right. So every page says My Fitness Tracker, Fit Wizard. The weight tracker says My Fitness Tracker. The food log says My Fitness Tracker. So we have not provided any additional information to Google to let us know what we're doing. So the better way to do this, and we kind of explored this a little bit earlier, would be to come in here and say, index is My Fitness Tracker. But if I go to food, I would be like food tracker, right? And then whatever we gave our name, Fit Wizard, right? So that each page will have its own unique title. As we start developing dynamic websites, later on we're learning JavaScript and we're integrating backend stuff, almost always I'm going to structure my website to be like, this is the name of the product, so I'll put whatever, Fit Wizard, or when we're playing with the weather app, this would be like Drizzle. And then this part of the title is going to be set by whatever the page I'm on, right? So, how you structure this stylistically is completely up to you. Some companies and some organizations will put that the opposite direction. So say, the most important thing is that you're on Fit Wizard, right? And then we're going to tell you food tracker. I generally find it best from a user standpoint to be like, oh yeah, that's my food tracker tab right here, because it's gonna be in your tab on your browser, right? You can see as we're doing this class, I'll have like 30 or 40 tabs open at some point. Like that's super common. I'm sure you guys all do similar things. And so just being able to tell at a glance what page I'm on is really important. So having a good title is key takeaway number one. The next thing, there are a few meta tags. We haven't really played with some of these, but there is one that is, this used to be super important 10 years ago. It's probably less important now, but it's still good practice. So we've got one that is meta name equals keywords, right? And the content is just a list of keywords that we want to be able to search by. So we would put in stuff like fitness, weight loss, right? Food, exercise, right? Google, I think, recommends 10 to 15 keywords at most, right? They don't put too much emphasis on this. Some other search engines like Bing or DuckDuckGo, some of these others, they might still use this more highly. So just a good idea to include them. But it's probably not going to move the needle all that much in Google. And then the other one is meta name equals description, right? And what we want to do in here is just kind of give a little blurb about our website. So it'd be like, Fit Wizard is a fitness and weight loss tracker. So if we do nothing else and we have these things in here, the very first time Google comes to our website, they don't know anything about us. They're going to copy all the content of the page, and they're probably going to look at these things and start to know about our website using this. The other things that it's going to rank very highly is, do you have an H1 tag? So Google does recommend that every single page have one top-level heading tag. They don't recommend that you have more than one, but whatever the one they have in here is generally going to be highly ranked in accordance with like what they're going to let you search on. Now that does not mean you should come in here and stuff a bunch of words in here, because that would do the exact same thing, which is they will probably actually penalize you for having a heading that is too long. So in our examples here, I think we did a pretty good job of this. Right, we have my fitness tracker here. We might actually, we have Fit Wizard here. Right, so when Google visits our website and they go to these 3 pages we've created, they're going to be a little bit confused because our H1s are all over the place. Right, we've got a whole bunch of different names in there. So we might want to, for the purposes of SEO, think about this from the perspective of what Google is going to see, and try to put in something. So maybe this needs to kind of reflect the title, right? So instead of putting our company name in here, we maybe want to come in and say activity tracker, right? And then on the other page, we might want to put weight tracker, and then on the other one, food log, right? Because Google does value whatever we've said, hey, this is the most important thing on the page. That's what H1 means to us, right? And so whatever we've got in there, Google is going to do something with it. Whatever it does behind the scenes is Google's secret proprietary information. Nobody can quite guarantee on it. And what they do today is probably going to be different than what they do tomorrow. So there's no guarantees of what it is, but they suggest that you use a important H1. And then the last one, we've been kind of talking about this all week anyway, which is if you build really good HTML structures, having things like article as a tag, if you're writing a blog or a newspaper, right? We have section ID tracker, but if I wanted to put a blog or if I was going to do a recipe in here, I might want to use an article tag, right? If I had a bunch of content, because Google is going to say everything else on the page is just navigation stuff. It's not as important, but the article tag is the meat, and so it's going to spend more time in here capturing all of that information, so that if we were trying to build something like a Mahalo and we wanted to build this website to let us teach you how to clean a fish so that you can eat it as a fillet, if we had our fish cleaning information inside of this article tag, Google is going to treat that with more authority and respect because it is inside good HTML. Now, when Google does its spidering, it's going to come and it's going to read your entire website anyway. So whatever it chooses to do is entirely up to Google. But the things that we can do to help it along the way are writing good structured HTML and using the correct tags in the correct places. And then using just the right amount of tags. If you go in there and you start doing things like, it's called keyword stuffing. I'm sure maybe back in the day you would see down at the bottom of the page in a footer, you would just see a giant list of words. That was the old way we would do search engine optimization. And we'd say, hey, this page is about all 600 of these words. And so Google would come in and stupidly let you be a result for those terms. It's kind of the same as resume stuffing when you go get a job. Unfortunately, like the nature of the beast is, for companies that are dealing with large numbers of applicants, they'll put all the resumes in a system and then search by keywords. They'll be like, I need a C++ programmer. And even if you don't do C++, you want to show up in that result. So maybe you would put, C++ somewhere in your resume so that it shows up, even if you make it invisible, right? Like the font color of white. So that is SEO. There's some other important things here is that really good SEO is about longevity, right? So it's kind of like a credit report. The very first time Google comes to your website, they're just going to say like, hey, we notice you exist now, okay? The longer that your stuff is around, if you're building a website that is meant, like a portfolio, for example, hopefully your portfolio is mostly about you and it mostly remains unchanged over time, so that Google says, if I'm searching for Estrella Bombita, this is the one place that Estrella Bombita exists, right? Now, there's a whole bunch of other magic that goes in behind the scenes about like, what is it? They used to have PageRank, which was how many other websites link to you. That was what like Google's original vision was. So they thought that there was value not just in the keywords, not just in the titles and the descriptions, but we want to sort these search results based on if 1,000 websites link to Estrella Bombita's portfolio, that's probably a pretty good indicator that this portfolio is valuable. So if I search for Estrella Bombita, I'm going to get the one that has 1,000 linking to it. They still probably do something like that behind the scenes, but a lot of that has to do with like trust, right? So the longer something is around, the more places that are linking to it, the better the content on the page, the higher it will move up search results, right? And then, this is why it's really critical, and we kind of harp on LinkedIn, we kind of harp on having a good GitHub profile. All of those websites are trusted, right? So if we search for, let's just search for, we haven't done this in a while, Google Eric Harrison. Oh, I'm getting a football player. That's the worst. Let's search for my full name. All right, so my website shows up the first, right? I haven't changed this in like 10 years, except adding like, I work at a new company now. I apparently have died at some point. It sees my book in here. It sees my LinkedIn profile. All of these things are starting to create a picture, an authoritative picture of this is me, and this is important. And if you're, in the context of going to get a job in the future, when Schuster was talking today about having all these things put together, the sooner you can start creating this, the sooner Google is going to know that you are a person, and the more of these things that link together, right? So like my website, I think, has a link to my GitHub, so that when people click on this, Google thinks Eric Harrison is this GitHub thing, and it starts to build a network of what it is. And so all of those things, when we search for my full name, start showing up on this page. All right, and you can kind of see even the blurb here. Because I did not provide a description to Google, it's just going to start slurping in the first part of content it sees, right? And then we've got one big H1 in here. So there's a bunch of magic that's going on behind the scenes, but it's important to, in the context of, there's two contexts here. The first is when you're talking about yourself and you're starting to prepare for a job search, having all of these things in place is really important. And then in the context as a developer, just building really good web pages and knowing that over time, if you don't do any silly nonsense, if you don't try to break the system, your stuff will eventually start showing up in Google. And then the better the content that you create, the higher the search results will be. So for if you're going to end up making a lot of behind the scenes software like apps and programs for individual users, maybe SEO is not that important to you. But I guarantee you that if you're working at a company and they've got a front, like a marketing website or a place, a sales website, SEO matters for those. And so if you're working on something like that, you're probably going to want to spend a little extra time just going to Google itself and reading through their best practices to see what they currently suggest. Cool. There are a few attributes that we haven't really talked about, but it's important because remember we were talking about how Google knows, hey, I'm linking to this, I'm doing this to here, to help it with understanding what was important, what was not important. There are a few attributes that you want to be aware of that go on your anchor tags. The first is rel, and with rel we have two options: follow or external, right? And the other one is rel equals no follow. Okay. Now, why these two are important is it's telling Google, because originally Google was built with the idea of the links matter. If you're building a product that has interactions with users, your users are going to come in and they're going to start putting in things like links, right? So we were doing this on GitHub. We were building Markdown and putting links to things. What we don't want to do, or what we're trying to tell Google here, if we use no follow, for example, is just because this link is here, don't give it the authority of my website. So if I'm GitHub, I would be willing to bet all of their links in our. Let's go check this real quick, just for our own, our own fun activities. Right? What are we at? Week 1. Yeah, link. Grab Google. So let's inspect this real quick and see it. Yep. So they secretly behind the scenes, when we were running Markdown, they added rel equals no follow. They're telling Google, hey, when you come to this page, even though you can see all this content, this link to Google, in this silly case, do not give Google the authority of GitHub. Do not let this website that I'm linking to, don't assign any weight or value to that. This is just a link. So anytime you're working with user-uploaded content or any place where your users can put in, this is another great example. I've said, hey, EricHarrison.info is here. They're automatically adding this attribute to each and every link we put in this page because this is user content. They do not want EricHarrison.info to get the weight and authority of GitHub. GitHub is a giant company worth billions of dollars. One of the ways that that SEO spammers used to build things like Mahalo that we were talking about is they would go and they would pay for links to be added to a whole bunch of websites that Google already knew about. So if you could get a link on, Yahoo Answers, some of these places like that, it suddenly gave your little tiny website or your company the weight and authority of Yahoo, right? Which is not the intended purpose of that. So this no follow attribute was the solution that most of the search engine companies, the big ones for sure, Bing, DuckDuckGo, Yahoo, Google, they all agreed, hey, this is really a good way to go. So whenever we see rel equals no follow, we are not going to treat that with any respect. We're just going to note that, hey, this page has a link to it, but we're not going to give it any weight or performance. The other one is rel external. Let's see if our code editor tells us anything about it. I've never used that one. So let's say rel equals external. We hover over it. Let's open this page. Rel. Is it? Rel. Oh, external right here. It was the list. So external indicates the hyperlink leads to a resource outside the site, and that following the link will make the user leave the page. So this is just one of the, it looks like there's a whole bunch of attributes in here. I haven't used any of these before, but we could put rel just like we're doing with we're using that same attribute on our style sheets, and we use it on our favicon. We're saying, hey, the relevance of this site of this link is to be a style sheet or to be a favicon or to be an external website. And it's even telling you here that like this can be on an anchor tag, this can be on a link, right? So icon was one of the ones we just played with that with the favicon, and it's saying, hey, when you see this, use that. But the ones to be aware of for SEO purposes is external and no follow. No follow prevents bad behavior, and external, I don't know if Google cares about this, but it's there, so just be aware of it. Any questions? And then another thing that Google recommends, we've been talking about it from the context of, kind of being helpful to people with disabilities, is making sure that every image on your page has an alt text, right? Google, being that it is a web spider, Google is not looking with eyes. And so what they're doing, if they get to an image, they don't know anything about that image, and that image might be important to your page. Like think if we were building Pinterest, or in the example that we were kind of playing with yesterday, if we were building a weather page, right? If Google came to our page and we were displaying the current weather with a picture in the background, we would probably want to put some alternate text in there that says, hey, it's a sunny day and it's warm and humid, right? So that when Google comes to our page and it sees that image has changed, it knows that image has this information about it that might be important to the search, okay? So not only do we want to use alternate text in our images for the handicapped or the disabled, we want to do it for search engine purposes as well. Okay. I think that's a pretty good stopping point for now. When we come back, let's take a quick break. We'll talk about some of the concepts. We haven't used any of these to date, so I want to spend a little bit of time on this. HTML and CSS polyfills. There's a million of them. We kind of talked about CSS reset, which is an example of that kind of thing. But we'll just go over a few of the ones that you might want to use in projects in this class or going forward, right? They're just kind of useful. So it is 5:50. Is there any questions before we take a break? All right, let's return at 6:05, and we'll see you soon. Recording, and we will share our screen. Find the button. All right. Everyone can see. The last topic, that's not even a word. The last topic we're going to cover tonight is about dealing with older browsers, okay? And dealing with concepts of shivs and shims, okay? So, you're building a website. Let's say you're working for Amazon, and they want to support Internet Explorer version 6 so that they can sell widgets to people that have old computers, right? But we've been learning a bunch of modern HTML, using semantic tags like menu, header, section. None of these existed in the past. These are pretty new. And so there's two options that we have available to ourselves as developers. Option one, we could not use them. We can go back to making everything, divs. We can have divs everywhere. We can not use Flexbox. We can not use CSS grids, and we can just rely on floating, like the very first version of like moving things around. That's option one. Or option two is that we can use JavaScript and a bunch of open source libraries to make it so that anyone who comes to our page that needs extra support can get it automatically. So we can write really good code like this and automatically have it be pulled into the page. So the first one I want to point out, almost always when I'm building something that's meant to be seen by a lot of people, I will use the HTML5 shiv or I'll use Modernizer. They're both going to do very similar things. I think they've merged the projects together. But essentially, what it gives us is a JavaScript file that we can load into our page simply like this, right? So I can come in here and say, I'll go up into our head and put in this code, and we'll dissect this, right? Because it's using something we haven't seen yet, which is this is a conditional comment, so that if the browser is less than IE9, right? So something IE8, IE7, it's going to load this script. Okay, this is just a magic comment format that lets us target a specific browser. It's called a conditional. What's it called? Conditional something. Yeah, conditional comment. Okay? Really easy name. And what this HTML5 shiv does is that it's going to go through. It's going to be JavaScript. It's going to go through the page because the browser IE8, IE7 has JavaScript, and it's going to go through and look for any element it doesn't recognize, and it's going to do stuff to it. In some cases, it's probably going to replace it with a div, or it's going to apply CSS styles to it. Because if we loaded this page, I don't even have IE to test. Is there an IE test thing we can run? Let's see. IE7 tester. Right? Yeah. So we can test our websites. So we can pick something like, let's look at my company, moonrise.works. And this is probably going to break. Let's, you can pick any number of browsers. I guess they only have a couple. And it's going to run, and it's going to show us what this website looks like on IE9, which is probably going to be awful, right? So it says, okay, see, our IE9 doesn't even recognize the security certificate, right? So we would want to probably fix that if it were important. But what the HTML5 shiv will do is when we load this one line of code on our page, this one line here, behind the scenes, JavaScript is going to go and take all of those elements and replace it with something that IE9 or IE8 can use. Because we said less than 9. So this is an excellent open source project, and it's really easy to include in all of your products, right? So that we can have the full browser experience for anyone, regardless of if they're using a modern new browser or an older browser. So this is called an HTML5. The reason it's called a shiv is kind of like a joke, like an in-joke. Shiv is like a sharp, pointy thing that you stab things with. And so this is saying, hey, we're going to take the tool of JavaScript and stab Internet Explorer so that we can inject functionality that IE8 has not added to the browser, right? And so you'll often call this you'll hear this called either a shiv or a shim. And when we get into JavaScript, we might explore this more. There's a whole bunch of shivs and shims, specifically around functionality that we might want to use that is a little bit more power heavy, right? So if we were going to use the canvas element, right? The canvas element, which we haven't explored, lets us actually render content on our page controlled entirely by JavaScript. So if we were going to make a video game, we might use canvas to display all of the art assets, right? Rather than rendering in HTML, we would just put one canvas element and let's see if we can find an example. Simple JavaScript canvas game, right? Yeah. Cool. Where's it? Is there a try it button somewhere? Let's click in here. Yeah. So. Yeah, so behind the scenes, this HTML page has a whole bunch of JavaScript, and there's nothing here except a canvas element, right? This one single element is doing all of this stuff here. So we can draw balls, we can add physics, we can do all kinds of fun stuff, but This probably wouldn't work on older versions of browsers as well, right? Because some of this Canvas stuff is pretty new. So you might use a JavaScript shiv that will add some of this functionality to your page. Some of the examples that you might need to add with shivs is like support for media elements, right? We were learning about how to embed videos and audio into your website. Like, that's a pretty new thing too, right? And so we might need to use a JavaScript library that will give us that functionality regardless of what browser we're on. So that is the concept of shivving. There's another really good product called Modernizer that is going to just keep everything all up to date. So HTML5 shiv is really focused on those HTML5 tags, the ones that like navigation, menu, header, footer, the ones that don't exist in HTML4. Modernizer is going to give you a whole bunch of features, and you can kind of turn on and turn off which ones you want, right? I've never used Modernizer, so if, I am aware that it exists. If I was going to make a website that I expected the entire planet to use, I would probably come and reach for this tool and spend a day reading through this and figure out how it works. So, they're talking about feature detection here. I think this is probably the primary benefit, is that when we get into JavaScript next week, it used to be very common that we would say, if the browser was this version, do something an old way. Otherwise, do it in this awesome way. Whereas Modernizer gives you the ability to say, hey, if this feature exists, do it this way, rather than checking the browser itself. And it's got a whole bunch of stuff like CSS gradients. Gradients didn't used to exist in CSS, so if you needed that kind of support, Modernizer will let you have, we used to use images. So it would say, hey, if there's no CSS gradients, use the image where we're going to actually make a gradient. And it lets you expand the support of all the browsers that you're gonna cover. Okay? Those are the two main ones that I think you should be aware of at first, right? You probably, at a minimum, because we are working we're using modern HTML5 features, at the very least, you probably want to use HTML5 shiv and just include it everywhere, right? Especially for the website. Like if you're building a portfolio, if you want to go work at some cool factory or something, the HR person might not be tech savvy and they might be using an old browser. And you want your excellent portfolio you spent all this time on to render correctly. Otherwise, they're going to get there and be like, this website sucks, right? It's not your fault. It's the browser's fault. So this is a good one to always keep in your toolbox and to just get in the habit of including it. It doesn't take anything. Every other browser, right, if it's anything higher than Internet Explorer 9, which would include Chrome, Firefox, Safari, they're never going to load this script because this conditional format says skip. This conditional comment says skip over it. And it has a whole bunch of power features in here. I don't think you'll ever need really to use them other than the defaults, but you should just, in the context of being a professional software engineer, when you're going to start using some of this stuff, it's a good idea to just read through the documentation. Schuster kind of touched on this today, which is, just read it, right? Read the error messages, read the comments, read the documentation, because it's going to teach you a lot of the things that you need to do. We kind of showed that off when we were learning Git in week 1, which is, as you're doing things in Git, if you're in the wrong order, Git's going to tell you what command it's expecting next. Like, you have no file stage to commit. Perhaps you meant to run git add. Yes. Read the documentation and then be familiar with it. I'll include a link to this in our classwork just as an assignment that has no grade, just so you guys can come here and I'll probably just include it in Slack as well, so that everybody has this. This is a good one to have. If you're working in a company where you're working on stuff behind the scenes, you're doing products, you might never use this. So it's just going to depend. Okay? Any questions? That is the formal end of week 3. We breezed through a bunch of stuff because we're kind of on a tight week. So we've got some time available. I have some Kahoot games that I think would be fun to play, and then we can maybe experiment with our product that we started working on yesterday, the weather app. We can build a new app. We can add more features to our activity tracker. But really, now is a great time to review all the content we've discussed this week and in the previous 2 weeks. So if we want to get anyone caught up, now is the perfect time for it. Does anyone want to have any questions about any of this before we jump into the games? There is no right or wrong answer. Go ahead, Selena.
For that less than IE9, Internet Explorer 9, do you leave it as a comment?
Yes.
Okay.
And why this works is because the browser is going to treat this as a comment anyway. So when we actually look at the source code, did I save it? So when I actually look at the source code, right? So Chrome knows this is a comment. This is the exact same format of a comment for HTML, right? exclamation point followed by 2 dashes. So the browser says, I don't care about this. Except the browsers have all agreed that it says, if this comment has this little special box in here, right, I do care about it.
So it's got its own little tag situation.
Yeah. And it's wonky, right? Like there's a whole bunch of different values because this has changed so much over the past 20 years that like we used to use stuff like this all the time because we were supporting Internet Explorer 6, Netscape Navigator, Mozilla, AOL browsers at one point. And so none of this was formally a part of the standard. It's just kind of evolved to exist because Internet Explorer 6, for example, would see this comment and be like, this is an invalid comment. I'm going to run this next line of code. So it was actually breaking the browser to make it do stuff. But now this is like a formally defined part of the specification for HTML. And we can probably look at a couple other examples of this, like HTML conditional comments. Right, there's a whole bunch. Yeah. So like if IE6, right? And there's a whole bunch. We can do if true, if false, if less than, if greater than. Most of this, I'm gonna be honest with you, like the negative aspect of this is that for the past 20 years being a web developer sucked because of Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer sometimes didn't update itself for years and wouldn't keep up with modern technology. Back when Netscape and Firefox were the 2 big players before Chrome came out, Internet Explorer 6 was around for like 8 years and kind of worked. But Firefox was adding stuff like canvas elements and better JavaScript. So there was a stagnation that caused all of this frustration and pain for developers. Nowadays, it's much easier. Like if you see Internet Explorer 7 or 8 in the wild, that's pretty rare. But when you do, it's when you're working at a company that's operating on some kind of crazy scale. Like Amazon probably has customers overseas that are using computers that were donated, right, like 10 years ago. And so they still want to be able to sell to those individuals. So there are some cases where you might see wild stuff, but 99% of the time, just the basics that we've been working on is going to cover you most of the time. But it's important to be aware that there are ways to get around this, and that in this case is conditional comments or shivs made out of JavaScript that will give you some kind of feature that a browser may or may not support. When you're on W3 Schools and you're looking at that documentation, right? We were seeing this on a few of the examples. That's one we can pull up. Flexbox is a good example. Right, it's telling you what browser versions it supports, right? Like this is a pretty modern thing. Like it says this was supported by Chrome version 29. I think I'm at Chrome 90, right? This is like, Chrome 90. So this has been around for a while. But you might see an older Mac, a MacBook Pro from 2013 that nobody has ever bothered to update. They might be running Safari 9. And so if you wanted to have Flexbox, you'd probably need to shiv that in somehow. And so, let's just see if there's a CSS Flexbox shiv. All right, probably, yeah. So you remember those tags that we used to use when I was explaining, right? We learned display flex turns this on, but some of the older browsers you're gonna have to use one of these browser specific tags to turn it on, right? Because they didn't agree on what the standard was before. And so there's a whole bunch of ways that you can support different browsers. But in general, if you just start out with the assumption that the code I'm writing works on everybody else, and then kind of wait for either a request because people say, hey, your website looks bad. Just knowing how to go about finding how would I fix this for them is the easiest. And this actually came up at work this week. So to give a real world example, we have a product that lets insurance agents make outbound phone calls to their customers. And that product is working great. But we have this magic login system so that rather than knowing a username and password, they just put in their email address and they click a link in their Outlook client. Our product works in Edge and Firefox and Chrome and Safari, everything that's modern, but it doesn't work in Internet Explorer 10 or whatever. The problem is they might have their default browser set up to be Edge, so they're going in there and they're clicking on Edge, they're coming to the product, they're putting in their email address, and then when they click a link in their Outlook is loading Internet Explorer, and they're coming to our page and it's telling them, hey, your browser is not supported. And it was confusing to them. So There are still, especially if you're working in a corporate environment, older browsers do exist, and you just want to be aware that that is a problem that could crop up, and how to go about fixing it and correcting some of those things. Any other questions? That was a good one. Conditional comments. I'll send this link too because it's pretty cool.
I think Gregory might have had one. I don't know.
Did you have a question, Gregory?
I have a question, well, not on this, but a different subject.
Okay, well, it's review day, so what would you like to talk about?
Can we review more about media screen?
The media queries from CSS?
Yes, as I fumble on that one doing the homework.
Yeah, sure. Let's take a look at what we talked about earlier this week. Media types, yeah. So we talked about the two major types that you would do, right? So the attribute media would let us tell it tells the browser, what device is this for, right? So we had a few different options, which is all, which is going to go for always load this stuff, or we could say, hey, this is just for printers. Take out the colors, take out the whatever, hide the menu, right? But we also have the ability to write this inside of our CSS so that we can come in here and say, did I have an example? Oh, we took it out, right? We can come in here and use a special type of selector and say media, and then we can come in here and say print. Okay, and we can also say, what do we call our thing here? Nav. Yeah, menu. We changed it twice since then. So we could say menu, display none. Right. So the important part about a media query like this, it starts with an @ sign and then it has media. Then it has the type of device that it's going to render on. But we can also do special conditionals, and we'll talk about that in a second in the context of making responsive design. Then you've got your squiggly brackets, okay? And then inside those squiggly brackets can be any number of CSS rules we want, right? We can come in here and say header, font size, 1000 px, right? It can be ridiculous. Any number of rules, any rule that is valid up in your regular CSS, you can put inside of a media query. Should we following along so far?
And then after the print, you can put other things, right? Like print and blah, blah, blah.
And print is a bad example. You'd usually probably want to use screen and min width equals 400. Is that the right format? I always have to look this up. So media query CSS and media rules. Yeah, it's CSS format, right? So we do max width 400, and then we put in px. So what this does is, because we've set a rule in here and we said, hey, when I'm on a screen and this CSS condition is met, so in this case the minimum width of the page is 400, do this thing. Okay, this lets us really start to design a responsive interface, because before we were just kind of hoping that that CSS would place things correctly, especially when we started talking about grids and flexbox yesterday. We might have defined a menu element that we want to be hidden completely when we're squished down or we're on a mobile page, right? And so let's see, what was this? Index? We have this loaded here? Yeah. Oh, I made it terrible. Gosh. Right. So now our menu is hidden because our screen size is above that thing. But as soon as I drop down to a smaller window, right, you might actually define in your HTML, this is my mobile menu, and this is my desktop menu. And then you hide them or toggle them based on how big the screen is, right? What else would you like to know about media queries? They're really useful for being able to define how something will look on different types of interfaces, and you're almost always going to combine it with @media, screen, and whatever. And you can have as many of these as you wanted, right? We can have @media, print. We can have our print rules in here. We can do @media, screen, and min width, or we could do max width, 1000. Yes, right? I don't know how big this is. And then we can do menu, background, color, bullet. So regardless of when that menu shows up, as long as the screen is not above 1000, well, it's hard to. Let's turn this one off. Right, so that's always going to be blue until we go bigger than 1000 pixels wide. Right, so these types of media queries let us control what rules are going to be applied based on the size of the screen or the dimensions of the screen. But you can do this on anything, right? I don't think it necessarily is limited to the min width and max width. We could probably be like on the screen. Yeah, I don't know. I can't think of any other. That's a silly example.
Well, I think Gregory has another question.
Go ahead.
I grasped that now, but I was just wanting to get a quick overview of it because I stumbled upon it. But I do have more questions with CSS animation, if you could.
Which part specifically?
Um, that's gonna be a good one. That's a good one to explain. As an maybe I could touch on that on Friday.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, like I don't use animations very often, if at all. So, my way of answering your question is probably going to be to go to W3 schools and just experiment together, right? That's,
Yeah, cause I was trying to use some different type of animation for one of my projects I have to have on my portfolio,
mhm.
and it's not currently not working like the way I want it.
Yeah. So that's a perfect use of Friday, where we can go deep on the subject and just explore and try a bunch of different things. Anyone have anything else they want to talk about or go over? All right, no. Let's play some Kahoot, huh?
Give me a second, my computer locked itself.
Well, at some point, I'd like to go over grids.
Yeah, we can go over. You want to do that first, or we can? Because I also have a Kahoot for CSS grids, so we can have a little bit of fun with the learning of those as well.
And grids have always just confused me.
Yep.
One of those ones.
They confuse me too. That's why I'm not a web designer. I can make them work a little bit, but it's almost always trial and error. But we can definitely play with that, especially today. Right, we got plenty of time to just reinforce. I think the homework tonight really uses Flexbox primarily to set up a website.
Is grid one of those things that's kind of phasing out because of Flexbox, or
No, they really have two different uses, and I think the best example from that, this is the best image to illustrate it, is where is it at? What was this one, right? So Flexbox is operating on one dimension, right? So if you've got a horizontal list of things or a vertical list of things, Flexbox is perfect. It's the 100% the best tool to use. If you're working on two dimensions, which is generally going to be the structural appearance of your website, like having a menu and then a bigger content area and then a footer and all the stuff that we've been placing, when we start building like a header, right? Grids is the absolute best tool to use for that because you get the control to place things where they go. And it really is just like what makes grids so excellent is that it gives us the control and flexibility that we used to have with tables. So we used to be able to just build a table, make it full width and full screen, and then put our menu in the first row or the first column, put our content in columns 2 through 3, and then at the right have a right menu. But that's not the right way to write HTML. And between us moving away from tables in the 90s to us moving to CSS grids in the 2010 plus, we used a lot of the float stuff where we'd say we're not going to let the HTML define what to do. We're going to float things around, and it was a pain in the butt. And it was especially painful when you were trying to work on multiple devices. So when you had a beautiful website that was this size, and then you floated it down, you should have seen some of the CSS files we used to have to help with. Yeah, Andrew just shared a link. I haven't watched this, but I would encourage you to watch that as well. And then what we'll do after we play some Kahoot, maybe we play with some grids for an hour or two, and just explore how we would use that. We've done a few examples of that, but I think repetition will help. And then Monday's homework next week, even though we're going to start learning JavaScript, is grid-specific web design. So it's going to reinforce that even more. It probably would have been this week, but because we had a short week, I didn't want to overload everybody with projects. Cool. Kahoot. Where are we at here? Let's play. this one first. So this is kind of a generic CSS one, and we will do this live. Great. Theme options, classic. Cool. All right, so it's going to give you this pin, and we're all going to join this thing. Kahoot.it 875-5850.
Give me a minute.
Leah is in. Welcome aboard, Leah.
It's 875.
Nice. I like the exclamation point, Andrew. Very topical. 1, 2, 3, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is that it, buddy? Cool. Here we go. CSS. Begin. 3, 2, 1. In CSS, how would you select all the P paragraph tags in the page? Nice. Everybody got it right. You guys are great. Ooh, Andrew is fast. What does CSS stand for? Nice. Look at how well you guys are doing compared to last week. You know all the answers now. I'm so proud. What is the correct HTML for referring to an external style sheet? You guys were not fooled. Andrew took the top spot again. Nice. Where in an HTML document is the correct place to refer to an external style sheet? Nice. You guys are chugging right along. We gotta pick harder quizzes, huh? Which HTML tag is used to define an internal style sheet? What HTML attribute is used to define inline styles? Excellent. I don't see how it says you have the highest answer streak of 6. Everybody's got an answer streak of 6. This game is stupid. It's broken. Which is the correct CSS syntax? Which property is used to change the background color? Ooh, we caught someone. You spelled it the British way. Color. Busted. Which CSS property controls the text size?
We'll see.
Nice. Everybody got it. Good job. Whew. It's neck and neck on the top of the leaderboard. How do you change the font of an element? Nice. Let's see who won. Probably Andrew. Do you stick it out? Nice job. Third place. Second place, Leah. And then Andrew. Yes. Good job. All right, we got one more of these. Take a screenshot. Yay. Paste it to our team. Alright, and then we got one for Flexbox. So this one is probably going to be quite a bit harder. Let's create it. Good, 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 good. Yes. Classic. That is a lot of extra A's in your name, Leah. That is far fewer letters in your name, Selena. I like it. Change it up. Good stuff. Let's see if AB is as good as exclamation point, Andrew. Oh, nice. I like it, Gregory. Very good. All right, Flexbox. Let's go. What is the default flex direction?
Boy. Okay.
Yeah, 50-50 chance. And exclamation point Andrew should have showed up. Pick the other option. What is the default flex wrap?
Flex wrap. Oh.
Yep. By default, it's going to just consume as much space as it can. It will only do its cool wrapping when you tell it to wrap. What does justify content do? This one's tricky. Yep. What determines the main axis in flex? I don't think we covered this one. Maybe. Oh yeah, we did. Yep. Good job. Yeah. Flex direction will tell us if it's going up or down. Remember? How do you align content on the cross axis? I hate that they use like these complicated terms like cross axis. You know, it's easier just to say, oh, it's up or down or horizontal or vertical, instead of giving it a fancy term.
At this point, I gave up. It doesn't make sense to me.
That's why you gave up?
Sense
Okay.
if you did math, basically.
Well, we can definitely spend a little bit more time on that because it's really important to. We're talking about Flexbox versus Grid. One is one direction and one is multiple directions. Well, the Flexbox, by default, is going to go horizontal, but you can switch it to go vertical. But as soon as you switch it to go a different direction, all of those other things flip, right? So justify content now will work on. It still works in the main thing, but it's going to operate in a different direction. What value will distribute extra space evenly between items?
Nope.
Good. Nice. You guys all got that one. How can you make the content flow vertically in a Flex container?
Berkeley.
Yeah, you guys got it. So this is how I describe this when we're talking about, like, you know, they said cross-axis and all that nonsense. Really, we're just saying, do I want it to be horizontal left and right, or do I want it to be vertical up and down? And you do that by saying the default is row, right? So it's working in one direction, left and right. But if you flex direct columns, it changes it. Good job, though. Ooh, Leah swoops in at the last second and steals the victory from Estrella. That one's rough. That was a tough one. And only by like 40 points, too. Oh, we got one last question. True or false? Nice. You guys got it all right. Let's
No,
see. Who was the faster clicker?
we all got it wrong, I think.
Yeah.
No, it said they were all right.
No, we got all that wrong.
Oh.
Yeah.
Really?
Everybody got that wrong.
Yep, everyone.
Wait, let's look at this. Maybe the question.
I didn't
I just get a guess, but for some reason I had instinct to put blue.
Let's see. Oh, cool. There's a 0% correct. What did y'all put? True or false? To use flex, the container and all flex items must have display flex. False. So this answer's wrong. False is the right answer. All the items inside of it don't have display flex. Just the parent does. Okay, you guys all got it right. They just gave you the wrong answer for it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh.
See, I didn't even look at the score. I was like, oh yeah, everybody said false. Correct. Cool. All right, so it seems like, based on the feedback that we were talking about earlier, it would make sense to spend a little bit of time tonight going over both Flexbox again and maybe Grid a little bit more. Does that sound correct? All right, cool. Let's dive into it. Now, we got a couple ways we can go about this. We'll probably maybe even do both, which is I think it's really helpful to look at both Flexbox and Grid in the context of a clean environment, so like not a lot of fluff around the page. I think W3 Schools is a great example of this, W3 Schools, because it just gives us like boxes, and we can play with values and see how it moves things around. So let's look for Flexbox. Let's start with Flexbox. All right, so this is kind of what it gets to begin with. Now what we have here is the container has display flex. You can see that all the items, all the divs that are in here, do not have display flex because the answer that they had in Kahoot was completely wrong. If we put display flex in here, what would happen? It would probably break, right? Let's try. Yeah, it made things wonky, right? It moved the content of those boxes. It turned those into flex boxes too, which is not what we want most of the time, right? Okay, so the default, what do they call it? Axis is flex direction. Right, the default is row. If we change this to the other option, which is column, right, it just changes that vertical axis to up and down. What are some other things that we would do in here? We did justify content, space between, right? One of them. Probably have to go to a different example. I think they've given us extra. Next. What is a good one to look at? Let's look at this one. Alright, so let's add a few more items in here so we can play with it. 4, 5. We got 5 elements in here. The default, flex direction, row. We learned about justify content, but we've got it as center right now. But if we do space between, you guys all got this right. This is going to give us equal space in between each of these boxes, so it's going to take up. What are some of our other justify content options?
Space around.
Yeah. Space around. And what that's going to do is give us equal amounts of space in between the items as we have around them, right? So it's kind of doing what we were doing with when we were floating things around manually. We were using margin to do that for us, or in some cases padding to like give us little buffers between these elements. But this one single justify content will give us that extra space. If we change this to flex direction column, right, we're changing it to the other axis up and down instead of left to right. Okay, it's still doing that same information. We can change this. Let's say height 1000 px. Okay, let's make this super big. Now we see that justify content now is working on up and down, whereas before it was working on left and right. So whatever row whichever flex direction you're working on, this is why they're talking about this in terms of axes, right? Because the thing that you use to justify to move things around if you're in a row if you're in flex direction row is different. It was not justify, it's align items, right? And what were some of our align items options? We had center, I think. Yeah. So that has now centered all of those items this way. So whatever, if you think of it in terms of, let me pull up maybe a notepad or something, or paint. So when we're working with like the default is this, we're on this x-axis. And so if we were spacing these, let's say we had a couple boxes, right? And we made our, when we were on the mobile view, right? Some of these, when we do flex wrap, would push down to another row, and that kind of made it look ugly, right? The things that you control in the row, when it's in the row view, is the exact same thing you're gonna control in the column view, but it's gonna be operating in a different direction. So the direction itself switches from left to right to up and down, right? So we can see we've got centered here. If I change this back to row, right? Now it's still centered in the middle of this giant 1,000 pixel high blue box. Some of the other things, I have to look all these up all the time. So let's go to align items. Right, there's a whole bunch in here, and what you use them for is going to be dependent on what design you're trying to go for, right? So align item center. Stretch, right? So we could come in here and change this to stretch. Right? Now these items are going to take up as much space as it can vertically. But if we change this to row, or from row to column, right? Now it's going to not stretch because that no longer worked, right? Why did it not work? Oh, because we don't have a width set, maybe. What's here? 100 px. Yeah. So we'd want to put it here. This. Nope, it didn't work either. Interesting. Flex start, flex end. Flex start.
When it starts doing that, where it doesn't make sense that it didn't do something, that's where I get confused.
Yeah, this is going to happen to you forever. It happens to me every day, especially with stuff like this, where I think it should do something and it doesn't do it. And so the only way we could figure this out is we could go line item stretch. Like, let's search Google for this. Line items stretch, not working on column. So there is an answer here where someone has asked this exact same question, and they're giving you a pretty easy, like we could copy this into, oh, there's even a button here, run code snippet. If I run this, like, stretch is not working, right? That's kind of hard to see in this little dumb thing. But someone has an answer that says you have specified a height on your flex item, so that's the reason, right? So because we have a height in here, so because we have a width in here, we have said this can be no bigger than 100 pixels wide. But as let's change this back to flex, right? Stretch. Right? So when this was in row format, it could stretch as big as it wants because there's no height set. But when we move to column, right, it doesn't because we have a width set. So it's operating on a different axis now, but we've told it in the item itself to let me control that. So if we took out this width right here, now it will work. Got it? But the real root here is I don't know the answer either, and that would bother me. And you know, in these scenarios, like we're working with things that we're just playing around with this, so it's like a fake scenario. But if I came across this in real life, I'm just going to turn to Google and see if Google will tell me the answer. And 99% of the time, you're going to get an answer that's like, oh yeah, duh, I forgot to take out the, like, I had a width. In this one, it said you had a height on your items, but we didn't have a height, we had a width. So that tells us what to point to. So some of these things that we have in margin, right? We have a margin here. So that was giving us extra padding, even though we didn't. Let's change this to 600 px, right? So it's not so crazy. Right. So let's take out stretch and do center again. Let's give us a width. 100 px. Okay. And let's go back to row. Right. So we have space around set. Okay. But you'll notice that when we had a margin in here, margin 10 px, okay, you're going to see these boxes shift. Or you should, maybe. Let's do margin 10px. Oh, interesting. So because we've already set these correctly with space around, it's overriding this margin. So that's a good example of, that's an interesting phenomenon, right? I would have thought this might have broken what we were trying to do design-wise because we had set a property that was being overwritten by justify content. But if we did, let's see, instead of space around, let's just do, what's the default? Justify contents, flex start, right? Is that an option? We gotta make this bigger, width, 800. Yeah. Okay, flex start. But now if we put in a margin, we say, let's make this 30. Right, now it has moved these around in a way that we probably don't want because we have a margin in here. But as soon as we change this to space between, right? We can, let's change this to something even more ridiculous. Let's just do 0, 0. Right, so we only want to do a margin on the right, right? So it looks kind of like, I mean, this is when we were working on other CSS before we started learning about flexbox and grids. Like this is the old way of positioning elements around the page. We set a margin, we float it, we create padding, but now we've added a margin to this element. But when we want to go in here and use like a line item space between, right? Like, oh, I didn't mean to do it there. Space between. It is not correctly putting space between, or it is, but it's also got extra padding on the left and right. So a lot of these CSS properties will conflict with other properties, and it's really important, like especially as you're designing something new, that the easiest solution is almost always to like take out all the nonsense that you're doing in there, and you can see that really this is what it's supposed to look like. And if we did space around like we had before, now it looks and behaves correctly like we'd expect it to. But there might be a situation where you want to do space between as the default and still have a margin to the right. I don't know what that scenario would be, but that's up to you as the designer or the developer that needs extra margin and padding. And generally, like my method of doing stuff is I'm just going to fiddle with it until it looks like what I want it to look like. And we've kind of played with that over the last couple of days and weeks. What else can we do here that would be interesting for you? So we've learned about the difference column and row, right? This is column. It's changing the axis that we're working on, so rather than the default of left to right. The other thing that we were talking about, let's change this back to row, how this relates to us in terms of we saw in the test that flex wrap, if we take out the width here, right,
How popular is shrink and grow?
As flex properties?
Yeah.
Let's look it up.
Do you do flex usually, or is this not your area?
I'm going to be honest, and like this is probably a great question to ask. Maybe it would have been a great question for Schuster today if we'd thought of it. Someone who works more on the front end probably has way more touch points with Flexbox than I ever have in my entire career. I've used this twice. Where would you use this? Flex shrink. Let's try the example. Flex shrink. So it's making things expand or grow based on the size. I don't know if it's going to be necessarily something you would ever. I'm struggling to even like create a scenario that I can explain to you where this would be useful. So, to me, the answer is no. But I know that I have this ability if it ever came up. Flex grow, perhaps, if you're. Maybe as an example, we've been working on these like portfolio cards, right? And we wanted to have the ability to have one of our cards be a little bit bigger for some reason. Maybe it needed to have a URL at the bottom, or it had a bunch of stuff, and we wanted to like highlight this as the biggest project we did. We might have flex grow as we might apply it to one of those items specifically. Like here, the third of this type, this flex shrinking, right? So the blue one is smaller, right? We can also change this to 2. You might want to make it so that one of your cards that uses Flexbox is bigger or smaller. That's maybe one scenario to do it, but yeah, I mean, this is really like a designery question, and there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do in CSS. There's hundreds of properties. We've covered just a few of them. I don't use them very often, and you might not ever use them very often either. But if Andrew goes, and like he says, he's like, I want to be a front-end developer, or I want to work on designs and things, you might use it every day.
Because there's more properties of Flex than what we've gone over.
Oh, yeah. Let's look that up. I don't know how many there are completely. Let's see. Google Flexbox CSS properties. There's probably 60. Complete guide. Okay, that's the... Yeah. Flex basis, flex direction, flex grow, flex shrink, flex wrap. There's a whole bunch for the grid. Then there's a bunch of properties like align items, justify content that don't have flex in front of it, but that you need to control your flex boxes. CSS was really designed to work together with other properties. So like, we're even using flexbox in these silly examples, right? It's coupled with the fact that we made the background color orange and blue and yellow and pink. So you're going to be mix and matching these properties left and right. Like the flex itself might only have, these six elements that technically belong as a part of Flexbox, but we've also seen that we need to use align items and justify content to control how the spacing and padding works on those elements. But those attributes, let's look at justify content, right? You're going to use that on other stuff as well, right? It's not just on Flexbox, right? Or maybe it is, yeah. This is a Flexbox specific CSS property that does not have a use outside of Flexbox, which is weird. What about align items? Yeah, this looks like another. I don't know, like. This is a great example of how CSS is sometimes frustrating. This has been built on over a number of years by a number of different groups, a number of different teams. A bunch of different browsers had implementations of this. And so sometimes a lot of the properties and things don't necessarily make sense. If I was designing CSS today, I'd be like, all the flex stuff gets flex dash whatever. And I maybe would do like flex dash justify or flex dash align. That would make more sense to me. But they probably, when they were designing this, thought like, we're going to have something else as well, and we're probably going to want to use align items. So in 5 years, there might be CSS dimensions instead of CSS grids, and they might reuse align items for that. I don't know. It'd be hard to know. In terms of how often will you use this, it really comes down to how much front end web development are you doing. This course we've spent roughly 3 weeks learning HTML, CSS, including some of this layout stuff, and then we're going to spend 7 weeks working on JavaScript and databases. So to me, and that has held pretty true, is that if you're a software engineer or you're at any stage of your career, you're going to spend a day working on the design and then 10 days making it work. Unless you're a designer or unless you work at a company that makes websites for other businesses, like a marketing firm, someplace like that. And then you might choose to specialize as well, right? You might become a designer. You might become a front-end developer. You might become a back-end developer, and you'll never touch this ever again. It's hard to say. And so in the context of just giving you enough to be able to get your first job and get available, it's really more about making sure that you're aware that you have these resources where you can go find stuff on your own, because that will never change. You're always going to have to look stuff. You ask me a question, I'm still looking stuff up, right? You're never going to memorize everything. Okay, you want to keep playing with Flexbox? Where are we at? Did I lose? No. All right. So the other main thing that I think is really important to cover in Flexbox, and we're also probably going to cover in grids as well, is right now by default it's squishing, right? Which is kind of cool, but probably not the behavior we want. So we probably also want to have flex wrap, because by default, remember in the quiz, the default is no wrap. So it's not doing anything, and it's squishing. But we can change it to wrap here. And I think this should wrap now. Yeah, you'll start to see that elements will drop down on our page, right? So we would still, as a designer, this would be an excellent time to use a media query, right? So we could go at media screen and let's see, min width. What is that? 220. So let's say min width 225 px. Right. So anytime we're at this small size, instead of letting it continue to squish, right? Because you can see it's still. Let's pick a thing, right? So let's go. Right. We hate it when it looks like when we're at 400 and right. Everything looks great until we get to like 450. 524. Yeah. Right here. We're going to say 583. Anytime we're less than 583, we want to go into different mode. We want it to look like this, or to look right. So what we would probably do is come in here and say flex container, and copy that query, and we come in here and say we'll just copy all this to begin with. Make this look better. Now we're going to say that the width of that flex container is 300 px, right? So if we run this now, height. Oh, because we took out our height. 600 px. Oh, we did. Yeah, there we go. Okay, but then we're going to say width is 300 px. Okay. So it's still acting wonky. What would I do here? I'd probably come in here and make the opposite true. Right? So and max width. Let's say. Right. And now I'm going to put in this flex container information. And we will just simply say that the width is 800 px. Was it by default? Am I doing this backwards? Probably. Yeah. These are conflicting. So let's take that out. Let's say in width is 300. All right, that's not working like we wanted it to. So let's take it out and go back to how it was. All right, so we were here, and as soon as this little window, oh, I know what the problem is. Because we're inside this display, right? We thought we had this set up correctly because we were playing with this little slider thing over here, but the CSS screen property is set to the entire viewport, right? So let's. We were trying to make it so that when we had a small window, it was. So whatever reason, this little W3 Schools Try It editor is breaking our media query. So this won't work here, but I bet if we played with this on our Visual Studio Code, it would correctly work. Let's change this max width. Flex container. Blue. Where's the blue coming from? Flex container. Oh, Dodger blue. Yeah. Let's make this green so we can see where we're at. Okay. Is it ever going to change? Yeah. So it's changing right there. Perfect. So we just had it backwards. So instead of doing min width, we wanted to do max width. So as soon as it goes to max width, instead of where were we at? 500, we want it to immediately go to one row. So how would we do this? Let's see. We want it to look like this. So maybe what we do is when it gets to this height, we're going to change flex direction to column. Right? So yeah, that kind of works exactly like we wanted it to, right? As soon as we get to a certain type of screen, rather than squishing these together, and we probably need to decrease that a little bit. So let's make it max width 400. No. See, this little result size thing is lying to us. I don't know how to make it not lie. 505. Let's change. Oh, there we go. Right. So as soon as it gets to a certain height where these things would have squished together, we're going to change to a different set of rules that is going to change that flex direction. Okay. This would be really useful if we were making, when we were working on our menu, right? We had a horizontal menu in a couple of the products we've been playing around with. If I'm on a mobile app, right, the very first thing I might want to do is swap that so that it becomes flex direction column instead of row, so that those are squished together. I think what we were doing by default in our other project was we were hiding it. Right, so let's pull this one up. Go live. That's a bad example. What was our cool one? Let's use the my portfolio that we built together. Right, so I'll go live with this. And here we have this beautiful little menu up top that follows us around. But what we probably want to do is, as soon as we get to like a mobile view, we want to switch this to a flex direction column. So we'd come in here and we'd put a at media screen and max width, let's say 500 px. Then we're going to come in here, we're going to copy this information up here, and we're just going to change the flex direction to something else. Flex direction column. And I think this will automatically give us a really nice vertical menu. Yeah, perfect. And so now you can see that if we were doing this with CSS, or when we start learning about JavaScript next week, what we'd probably do is we'd come in here and say nav ul li display none. And then what we might actually do is come in here and say, remember we were learning about the pseudo elements that we would do nav ul before, right? Before. And we come in here and say content. We can add li and make like a hamburger menu. Right? I don't have an image for that, but what we've just done is we said, hey, I'm gonna so we've created a pseudo element here that would give us a menu, and if I was to click on this, right, when we learn JavaScript, or we could do on the hover, right, so I could do nav ul before hover. No, we probably want to do this with JavaScript. But what we would do is when we hover over this, we'd want to, well, we might be able to do it here. Nav ul li hover. No, let's do it here. Hover. Now we have to do it on the li. So let's do it on the li. Let's see if that works. Li hover. And then maybe do display block. I don't know if this will work or not. Yeah, it doesn't. So we probably do this with JavaScript. But this is the kind of thing you will do with CSS where you're going to have it so that when we switch to mobile mode, the menu disappears. Right? You've probably seen this if you've gone to a mobile version of a website where they replace it with a hamburger menu like this. You click it, and it expands out this menu. Right? It would be really easy for us to do this with JavaScript so that when you click on that menu, we would maybe use a CSS transform to expand it out. Okay? And I think we could probably do it in here, actually. So nav ul hover. Let's look it up. I always forget the freaking syntax. So transform. All right, we learned about this a couple days ago. CSS transform. Let's look at it. All right, so it wasn't transform. It was the other one. Transition. What was the other T name? We're going to animations. Transition. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So in the element, we say li hover transition. Display 2s, right? And then when we hover, we say display block. So I think this should work. No, it didn't work. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't play with this. There's a better way to do this, and the better way is JavaScript. Okay? But that's how we can use CSS media queries in combination with Flexbox to change what was a flexed row into a flexed thing. And then if we were to come in here and say, if we were doing this with JavaScript, we'd come in our console, and our JavaScript, when we write it next week, would say something like on hover. Let's do nav ul on hover. Right, do function nav ul li dot style dot display equals block. Right. So we just created a add an extra thing. It's not a function because we don't have that. Okay. Yeah, we can add jQuery. Well, so this would be valid JavaScript if we were using jQuery, and that would say that when I hover over this, expand out this menu, right? And it's real simple. It's one line of code, but it's hard to show off on the moment. Any other questions with that? Because I think that's pretty powerful. But it kind of shows off how the media queries will let us use Flexbox to control the direction. And we probably want to do something similar down here that we were playing with earlier, right? Like this looks pretty good because these are also Flexbox items. But as soon as I start going down to here, like it kind of gets a little janky. And maybe that's okay, but if this is my portfolio and I don't care about it, I might want to manually control using some of the other the flex options that we have here. And so I'd probably spend a little bit of time in here playing with seeing what all the options I have available to me so that I can correctly flex this out. So let's, yeah, I mean, this would be maybe a good use of, would I ever use flex shrink or flex grow? I might use it in combination with the size of the viewport. Yeah. Cool. Any questions about this? We want to go over this a little bit more, or do you want to move on to grids? What do you want to do? A lot of these examples are challenging because we have to like invent scenarios to show them off in use. And so I promise that if you're just aware of this is how I go look up the answer, when we start building stuff over the next couple of weeks, this will become radically clear. And the homework that will happen today is going to be about building stuff with Flex, and then the homework on Monday is going to be about building stuff with Grid. So we've got some examples created that will walk you through this.
So to make the navigation bar disappear is easier in JavaScript.
To make it appear, you mean?
To make it disappear, like when you shrink it down and it turns into the navicon.
No, it's easier to do it in CSS in the first place, right? Because all we had to do was when we were using our media query, we said, oh, I took out the code. Like, this is literally one line of CSS. Nav ul li, right? Display none. That is what this single line turns it off. But when we start working with JavaScript next week, the way to make it turn on again when we want to, whether it's on a click or on a hover, is going to be, we're just going to be changing the value of this property. And so I can show that off real quick. It shouldn't take too long. All right, so let's get jQuery and just add it to our thing. Okay, just so I can write one line of code instead of 20. jQuery. Okay, is there a CDN somewhere? Yeah, jQuery. So we will learn about what I'm doing here. Next week. But I'm basically just installing a JavaScript library that provides some niceties, right? We were talking about shims and shivs earlier. jQuery is a great example that was really invented back when browsers all did JavaScript differently. And we'll probably talk about that next week. jQuery said, rather than learn the Internet Explorer way to do this, and the Firefox way to do this, and the Chrome way to do this, here's the jQuery way to do this, and we're going to do all the hard stuff behind the scenes. So we will work with jQuery a little bit. It's probably in use in 50% of all websites on the planet. There are other frameworks. We don't want to spend too much time talking about specific frameworks because depending on where you work, you're going to use a bunch of different ones. But I'm going to use it here because it's real quick. Right, good. I've added this to my code. So jQuery is there now, and then I'm going to write just some JavaScript real quick. So script, I don't have this actually. I'll just add it directly. So we've got our menu. This is the menu that's happening. So what I'm going to do, I'll do it up here. Script, I equals text JavaScript. And then jQuery has a document.ready, okay, which is a function. Okay, so when the page loads, run this code, and I'm going to say, what was the name of this element? Right, so nav ul, right, on hover function. Right, I'm going to say nav ul li dot each, and we're going to say function this dot style dot display equals block. Right. So this is one simple way, like 3 lines of JavaScript, and we've, in theory, made it so that when this is down here, I didn't. So change it to click maybe. So you see, I just made it so when I click it, it shows the rows. Right? But now we would probably want to come in here and say, you know, when I click it, it displays it, and when I maybe when we click it again, actually, let's do mouse over, mouse in, mouse out, and we'll do display. We turn it back off. What is the jQuery mouse in? jQuery mouse events. Mouse enter. Hover. Oh, I know what the problem is. Yeah, let's just do nav. Because there's no element there. Hover. Blur. Mouse enter. Let's do mouse enter. Mouse leave. And we'll do li dot. Okay. We'll do li. This might work. No, because it's not li there. So we'll do ul. Right. So now we've got a very tiny little target here, but you can see we've got the makings of a menu if we get it exactly right. So probably what we'd want to do is add a hidden element that is an li, right? So we'd probably want to come in here and say li id equals menu handle, and we'll say whatever equals sign, right? And in our CSS, we'd want to, instead of doing this, where we added the content with the pseudo selector, we probably want to do li menu handle display block, and then outside of this we'd want to say display none, right? So the handle is hidden by default, but as soon as we go into a small thing, right, now we've got a more beautiful way to right, so this is the default, this is our menu. You can see that the handle is not there, except it's still got so we'd have to fix our JavaScript, which was in here. So we'd want to do li menu handle, right? And we can actually, let's just call this by its name, and then we say li mouse leave. Shoot. Mouse leave. Let's just leave when we leave the nav. Right. Why is it hiding? Oh, because I'm hiding each, right? Then we can do if this dot id equals menu handle continue else. Right, so we're skipping over that one that we were using as our menu. That didn't work. But we'd probably want to debug this and make it work. But anyway, it's like 4 lines of JavaScript would save us a whole bunch of time and energy. But it's combined with some of the CSS that we've learned for Flexbox and grids, so that you can start to make responsive designs that, you know, the appearance and the look and feel on mobile is different than desktop. Okay? Kind of following along? And we'd probably want to not use an equal sign here. We'd want to use an actual image. We'd probably want to make that image do some fancy animations, right? If we're designing for a mobile experience to be rich, we'd maybe want to use some of the transform stuff so that as the menu is here, maybe this rotates. Maybe we want to make it so that menu handle on click display the thing, and then on click on double click, right? We're gonna say li each when we display it. So the problem is we made this in li that is so we've had JavaScript, and the bug that's here in our code is we've made it so that as soon as I double click, well, double click is not working. That's stupid. Oh, because I didn't put it on menu handle. Menu handle. Right? So as soon as I double click this, it's also going to, except it's not. Why? Double click was a thing. It was in here. We saw it in the documentation. Oh, double, DBL. Right. Right. So the problem that we have here in our code is when we click it once, everything's there, but this li that is a part of our menu is also an li. So we'd have to capture the ID and then skip it. Right? So, and then we're learning about JavaScript earlier. You know, one of the things we talked about is console.log, I think. And so we can do this dot attribute ID, or we can even go, let's do this dot ID. We do if this dot attribute ID equals menu handle. Let's make this not equals, right? Right, so what we've done is, I think we've just skipped over this specific element. Yeah, so now it works. Exactly right. We've used JavaScript. Okay, but the CSS itself is still what is defining the styles. And you can see even when we're playing in the JavaScript, we're changing CSS attributes. Okay, so you're always going to be doing something in CSS, even if you're using JavaScript to make it move around, make it do things. And maybe what we'd want to do just for, like, when we click it, we want to say menu handle, maybe we do style dot animate, right? Or turn on some kind of animation so that it does a little jiggle or it moves around, right? So all the CSS stuff that we've been kind of playing with before, you can turn on and turn off in the JavaScript when you're actually in here working. But now we've created ourselves a kind of crappy little menu, right? There's better ways to do this for sure, but it's a quick way to play. And you can see we still have some bugs, like it does not go back to the regular mode when we were in the click mode, right? So this is kind of the fun, right? Why is our menu still there? Well, because we never turned it off. Any questions? Anyone want to? You want to dive into grids next, or you want to digest some of this Flexbox stuff some more? Yeah. All right, cool. Let's take a break. It's 7:30, 7:24 right now. So let's say 7:35. We come back, get a beverage, get yourself a drink, and then we'll spend really the last hour answering more questions. We can play with some more examples. A lot of the stuff that we're learning requires us to combine a bunch of things, so we have to just kind of keep chugging along, and then it'll all start to make sense, I promise, very soon. Okay? See you guys in 15 minutes. Share my screen. Great. Share. Boop-a-doop-a-doop. Alright, everyone can see? Alright, cool. I was just playing around in the developer console here, and I was looking at the flex element that we created. There's this little weird little icon that was next to display flex, and it tells you what it does. It pops up a little title. It says Open Flexbox Editor. It might be kind of hard to see. Let's see if I can make this bigger. Right? And when you open it, it gives you all of your Flexbox directions as options in here, and so you can like turn on Flex Wrap, and you can see it's adding the CSS to the thing, so you could fiddle with this in real time and see how it changes on the page, right? So if we wanted to, like, you can see space between, space evenly, move it all to the right, right? So like all the options that we have in Flexbox, there's a little widget here. And what I would maybe do, because if you saw like when this was loaded, none of these were selected, but I could click this, get it to work how I wanted it to look, and then just copy the things that it added, right? And I'd be like, I'm gonna add this to my CSS. I thought that was really cool. I've never seen this before, but it looked useful, especially because my way of building things is fiddle with it till it kind of looks like I want it to, right? So any kind of tool like this that will help me fiddle quicker is great in my book. Neat. All right, how are we feeling? We want to continue playing with Flexbox. We want to come up with some more examples. Do we want to work on our weather app and maybe use that as an opportunity to explore grids a little bit more? What would we like to do? We've got about an hour and 20 minutes left. Or do we want to review anything from weeks 1 or 2, right? What would be most useful? Any? Leah, go ahead. Yes.
So remember like when we were doing Markdown and you like got us to each do our own individual thing for like 15 or 20 minutes or something, and then we like talked about it
showed
after
off?
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think doing like that doing something like that would be good.
That's awesome. I love that as an idea. It's interactive. What can we do in 15 minutes easily? Maybe we just be creative. All right, here's what I think we should do. We should use either Flexbox or grids, and we should design some kind of generic web page that uses one of those two things. So you can make a product listing, you can make an actual website laid out with grids. Let's just it's 7:40 right now. Let's come back at 8:10 and have something cool to show off, and I'll participate as well. Cool. Does everyone know what we're doing? We're going to start a new project. So use all the speed tricks we know. It doesn't, we don't have to check it into GitHub if you don't want to, but let's, $ or exclamation point tab, so we get a little template of an HTML website, and let's build one thing. It doesn't have to be a full page unless you want to play with full page as your example, using either Flexbox or grids. Okay. Cool. All right. And feel free to, I'm going to be here playing around too. So if you have questions or need help, do not hesitate. What am I going to build? Why did I agree to this? Oh no. How's everybody doing? You guys make something cool? Everybody done? Are we ready to share, or do you want a few more minutes?
I could do a bit more, but I could share.
Okay, let's
Yeah.
go 5 more minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, I could do like 5 more minutes.
I could use like a couple more hours.
Okay, we can. We'll regroup at 11 p.m. tonight and show off what we got.
Yeah.
Honestly, I feel like I could go a long time. I could do a lot.
Yeah, it's fun, right? Like you can start to see. Anyway,
Yeah, this is fun.
it's gonna be even more fun when we can make it do stuff. That's the good part.
I got lost.
Which part?
I just I got lost because I left and came back,
Oh, okay.
and it was just dead quiet. And I saw like, okay, we doing a project. I don't know what, but I can make me on my own project.
Yeah, it was Leah's excellent suggestion, which was, on week 1 we all worked on Markdown. We all showed off what we were doing. So we said the rules for this was we were going to spend 15-20 minutes just building something using either Flexbox or Grid. And it doesn't have to be big, but you're just going to, as quickly as you can, build something kind of cool. Then we're going to do a bit of a show and tell.
Show our skills. Yeah, I'm behind.
All right, that's fine. Well, we'll give you like 5 more minutes, and if you're not, we can skip you as well. This is just supposed to be a silly way to play and practice. And
But I do say that it's a good idea to show what our skills ability in a short period of time, so can we also show you also demonstrate how fast we could put something up in a way. When we did the typing skills, and like speaker say sometimes with time management and also deadlines.
Yep.
It kind of shows like, okay, how fast you could build up a website real quick in 15 or 5 seconds or whatever.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I'm slow.
You'll definitely want to improve on that.
Yeah.
Later your career. All right, we'll spend maybe 5-8 more minutes and check in.
Sounds good.
Record project. All right. Share your
Okay.
screen.
Okay. So I made a card thingy, and here's a deck right here, and I have like animations. Whenever you hover over them, they grow, and they have a drop shadow. And they the top one is, let's see, it's flex. It's justify center. So it's always in the center because it's supposed to like obviously a deck would be like laid on top of each other, but yeah, that's what, because it's a deck, and then the hands, like, it's spaced out. It's space around, so there's like space on the edges too, and yeah, and it wraps around.
This is excellent. Very cool.
Yeah,
I love the attention to
thank you.
detail, adding the shadowing and the effect. When you
Yeah,
hover over it.
that's what that 5 extra minutes was for.
Who wants to go
Okay.
next? Who's ready?
I no longer want to present. No, I'm just kidding. I'll show you.
There is no right or wrong answer. A lot of this comes down to how fast can you type. So
Essentially. So I was aiming more towards, I was messing with grid, and I was
cool.
creating a layout. So I was just kind of experimenting with like positioning with so I set up my grid container and my grid template areas and just started laying things out, and then kind of adding, like, I added grid gap in between, and I was just starting to mess with like positioning the actual content within the grid and messing with different units to get everything sized with resizing.
This is excellent. Very good. That's exactly how I build things too. I mean, like, you're doing it the professional way right now. I'm super happy for you. All right, who's next? I can show off mine if you want. Mine is I built it live. I was still sharing my screen, but let me hear. drag this over here. Share my screen. Mine is kind of in the same vein as Leah's, but my idea was I thought it would be cool to like build a Netflix type of clone using Flexbox for my categories, and then I spent quite a bit of the extra time we had putting some cutesy styling. So when you hover over titles, oh, is it flashing? It's flashing on my screen. So when you're hovering over the titles and things, it lifts it up using the transition. I added some drop shadows. I kind of started thinking through styling. If I was going to continue building this, right, then like the next page I would have to build is what does the actual movie viewer page look like, and then I'd want to be able to add. So this would be like a JavaScript thing. I'd want to make it so that I can scroll through this list of items using JavaScript or some other mechanism, because right now it uses the default browser scrolling, but I don't have Flex Wrap turned on because I didn't want it to rotate around. But the idea was if I'm in a mobile phone, right, maybe we would use a smaller version of these titles, and then as long as we have left and right controls, I'd be able to navigate through the titles. So that was kind of what I did. And then I, from a design standpoint, I'm not a designer, but I love blue, so I picked a blue that I thought was cool, and then I used it as the background for my heading. I used it as my section headings, and then whenever you hover over a card, it uses that same blue. So that's what I built.
That was really cool.
All Flexbox. All right, who's next? Anyone? It's okay if you don't have anything to share, but if you do have something to share, we would love to see it. I will take the silence as a no. Cool. All right.
Give it a minute.
What's that?
Just give me a minute.
Okay.
I think I just have something acting up real quick.
I don't work well under pressure. Can't do it.
Yeah, I mean, this example is kind of a silly one. You will probably never work in this type of environment, but I will say something that is similar to this, and he didn't really talk about it today, Schuster. One of the things that we do pretty often at the clubhouse is that prior to the pandemic, once a month or something, we would do like a 4-hour hackathon, or sometimes an overnight hackathon, where anyone with any kind of software development skills, designers, artists, would get together and just build silly stuff. It's a really good way, when Schuster was talking about networking and building a community of peers that you can count on and rely on to not only get jobs, but to like learn from. The clubhouse actually started before there was the clubhouse at all. We had a hack for education where we all got together at Augusta University and built, we worked on like 3 or 4 projects. One of them was we built a small portable radio tower that we used to give free internet to people in specific low-income areas of Augusta. That had so anyone that had a Wi-Fi laptop or whatever could hook up to this thing. We built a little web portal for it. Another thing we did was, oh gosh, it's been 10 years since we did this. We built a bunch of cool things. Another hackathon that we had a few years later was to do a bunch of stuff for NASA. So we built a satellite that could pick up CubeSat signals from outer space. And these hackathons are like probably the only time you'll ever, as a software engineer, work on a group project under a time constraint like this, where it's like, hey, we got 4 hours to build something. And it's almost exactly like we're doing here. You're not building something to be perfect. You're just building something to have fun and to play with new technology. Like, I never worked with satellite radio frequencies before. Like, that was a fun, cool little project that I worked on for 4 hours on a small team. And then other people on the team were actually making the antenna. There's lots of cool opportunities like that, and I hope you, as you enter your professional software development careers, he mentioned like meetups and Eventbrite. Like, there are lots of ways these are organized, but here in Augusta, a lot of those are going to happen through either the schools and universities or through organizations like the Clubhouse, where we say once a month we come together and we just build stuff for fun. We used to do them monthly at the Clubhouse, and that was a ton of fun. Everybody come in and, some people would be working on 3D printer things. One guy invented a light for his shoes for when he was running, and it like attached to your shoelaces. Just like cool, like building for the sake of building, for the joy of it. That's like the only thing I can think of where you'll ever be like, you have 4 hours to build something. You know, you will have deadlines at work, just like we have deadlines with homework, but that'll be more reasonable. It'll be like, you've got a week to finish this feature. It will very rarely be, you have 12 minutes to build a new website. Cool. Gregory, are you ready to show your thing off? What are you drinking, Andrew, that is bright green?
It's that Mio stuff you squirt in the water.
This one has caffeine in it as well?
Yeah, this one has caffeine in it.
All right, we are at 8:30. I guess Gregory's still working. Is there anything else we want to go over? That was a really fun project, Leah. Great suggestion.
Yeah, it doesn't like me.
Thank you.
What did you say?
Yeah, I said, yeah, it doesn't like me.
Oh, that's okay. This was really just for fun, as like a way to be silly and creative together. Is there anything else we'd like to go over? Any questions? Really, next week we're jumping into JavaScript, and then it's pedal to the metal the whole way. So we will continue to use HTML and CSS, but it will be additive, right? So we're gonna, like we did tonight, where we built some silly little project. We're gonna then use JavaScript to make it start doing things for us. We're gonna make it load content dynamically. We're going to make menus that actually work instead of break, right? All those little fun things. Any questions? Any thoughts?
I did enjoy that. That makes you like think on your feet and really like. I mean, of course, the whole time I was clicking between tabs trying to like reference things, but
I was scared, but it felt really satisfying.
Good.
yeah, no, I like the pressure.
I don't like the pressure. Like I told my boss, I'm a slow cooker, not a pressure cooker. Don't try me.
I never heard that before. That cracks me up.
I think like if we had like a little project like that for homework and then we presented it during class, I think that might be better.
Okay.
I mean, I like that every single time we finish with a major topic, like how we finish with CSS, and the end of end of the day, or probably like mid of the next subject, we turn it in and we have to show what all we learn in that one subject containing. And we add on to it, like I could say like a capstone. What I would do when I was in Cisco, we had like when she did make 2 capstone, but each capstone reflect on the project. So like the first project was like the stuff we learned, and then the second project is the first project, but add on what we learned about it.
Yeah, we definitely have more projects like that coming up. A lot of the ones that we have in the homework for these couple of weeks, by the nature of like we have only learned a tiny little bit, are not that exciting. The one that is scheduled for Monday is like it's going to walk you through building a website like this. And it asks you to use CSS grids. The one from tonight that is due Monday is using the Flexbox. So a lot of the stuff we did today, you could have swapped out that homework with just build a thing. And I think that's an interesting suggestion, especially going forward. Like, let's be more creative. Like, we control the homework, right? Or I control the homework at least. Like, we can make it more engaging and interesting. So maybe what we'll do after Monday is continue to do these types of homework projects, but make them more open-ended, just so we can have fun and build. What else? Any other thoughts? Anything you want to dive into? We've covered a lot. We've skipped over a ton of stuff. Like, there is a million CSS things that it's just not important enough to spend an hour on, but you might need to use them in the future. I would continue to urge you to check at W3 Schools. We've learned the basics, but we're really just scratching the surface of some of the design things we can do. Like Area tonight, we could literally spend a month talking about Area to make our websites more accessible. But
I do have a question.
Yep.
Can I transition into from web development to web designer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We're teaching you in this course everything you need to know to be like an entry-level full-stack developer. So you can do the front end a little bit, you can do the back end a little bit, you can do database stuff a little bit. As I would encourage you to, as you're working in your first and maybe even second jobs, think about the parts that you enjoy the most, and then continue to increase your skills there, right? So we're going to use JavaScript the entire way through, but in the back end, you've got like 8 or 9 different programming languages you can use: PHP, Perl, Python, Ruby. There's a bunch of frameworks, Ruby on Rails. People have made excellent careers just in learning one framework, right? In PHP, there's Laravel. On the front end, there's React, there's Angular. They all have their pros and cons, and they're all going to make you capable of doing certain things. Like if you wanted to be mobile first or build mobile apps with web technology, you could use React Native, and that would let you build a phone app with HTML and CSS and JavaScript. We're trying to give you just enough to be dangerous and to get a job, get hired, find out what you like. Because I'm sure each and every one of you in here, if we asked you again in a year, you're going to all have an opinion on what part of this development process you enjoy the most. But if we just taught you one of those, you might not be able to get hired because it's not enough to like jump in and be useful on a team. There are some, Udemy, Coursera, some of these like online schools where they let you just pick a topic and learn that really well. You could spend a month learning HTML and be like, what's the application of this? I don't know. You really have to have at least front end, at least back end, and maybe a little bit of database to really be effective at a job. I've spent most of my career not even touching HTML and CSS. That's somebody else's job. I'm going to make things happen on the back end. Be really cool. So all this CSS stuff, the reason I have to look up so much stuff is because I haven't touched it ever, right? Or I haven't touched it, for 10 years. What else?
Nothing for me. Oh, quick question. For that project that you did for the hackathon with the rural, where to helping the people in rural areas to get internet, did that ever pop off?
Yeah, we launched it shortly, like a month after that hackathon, because we built a whole like tower. We had to actually pay for internet so that Comcast would run a line to that device, and we ran it for I think 1 or 2 years. We were paying for it out of the funds that we used to fund all of these clubhouse programs. So I think it ended up costing us like $2,000 or $3,000 over a few years. And then it just at some point, like the usage wasn't high enough for us to justify doing it. This was way back in 2009. So there were parts of Augusta that did not have really good access to internet back then. Now almost everybody has a mobile phone. Most people have internet at the house, but the ones that don't have pretty decent stuff. But we were really trying to, it was hack for education. The idea behind it was like, hey, we want to provide a resource to underprivileged families so that they can, use the internet for Wikipedia and, all the stuff that we take for granted just by having a computer.
Yeah, that would be real nice if I could just do a reboot. Just a reboot, because when I was when I was at my grandma's house, we live deep in Burke County. Yeah, it sucks.
I mean, out here in Thompson, the reason I'm at this office instead of at my house is I get no internet at my house. Right? There's lots of places in the internet that are in the country that are internetly disadvantaged.
It sucks, and you have to pay like buying a new house to build a line to your own house. It really sucks.
But I am on the waiting list for Starlink internet from Elon Musk.
Oh yeah, I can't wait for that. That sounds nice.
This summer, I'm supposed to have it. I'm very excited.
Tell me how it goes, cause I really, really hope I get that as well. Cause that is I saw the idea, and I saw Ryan Tech knew that his plan was, cause right now you can't move out anywhere, but soon he'll have enough satellites you could able to just take out your house and like say you want to go camping in the woods, but still won't be connected to Wi-Fi. You basically carry your own Wi-Fi box and call it a day. I'm like, that is nice. I like that. Please hurry up and take off.
Yeah. They launch like 5 or 6 rockets a month that carry up 100 more satellites, so they're getting close. We're supposed to have it here in Georgia this summer, so I pre-ordered. It's supposed to be here July, August, hopefully.
So is it in just Thompson? Cause I'm about to see.
No,
I did
it's
remember
anywhere in the they're
in Georgia. Okay,
they're
baby.
going by latitudes, right? So like the first string of satellites really was like the northern states, and then as they add more satellites, it's moving further and further south because they've got to get satellites circling every part of the globe at all times so that it's got enough coverage. What else? Anything else you want to look at?
So, he mentioned earlier that he was talking about Bootstrap. So I know we're using like Grid and Flexbox right now. Are there even better frameworks or easier frameworks to do CSS like Bootstrap? And what all does that entail? Is that just like, you know?
Yeah, Bootstrap. There's a bunch out there. We will probably explore a few of those, though we're not going to spend a ton of time on it. But it kind of follows the same rules that I've been saying over and over again, which is, pick one, read the directions, and then follow it. Bootstrap is an excellent example. I use it on just about every project I actually work on when I have to do anything with CSS. Is that it just sets up a bunch of really good defaults and give you the tools to make things consistent across every device and browser. So instead of having to fiddle with a lot of these settings, Bootstrap is going to give us classes that are predefined that will make a lot of this trial and error stuff less painful. Now, the reason we don't make Bootstrap a big part of the course is that I think it's important to learn the fundamentals, because you might go to a company that doesn't use Bootstrap at all, and if all you've learned is Bootstrap, you're going to have a hard time keeping up. But like, here, let's see if there's some examples here. Yeah, so
I am
okay. So like, rather than defining our grids our way, right? We can use their pre-built classes that just say, hey, this is a dot container, this is a dot row, this is a dot column, and then you can pick things that are like column extra small 4, right? And that means something. And what it means is when, like, the column size is this, but then when it gets down to a certain viewport area, because you can attach multiple classes to an element, maybe it doesn't show up at all. So this simplifies a whole bunch of the responsive stuff that we've been working on. I mean, this was really, I think this was made by Twitter originally. I don't know who made this originally, but it's probably in the About somewhere. One of these major companies. But there's all kinds of classes in here, in this giant CSS file, that if you learn all those class names, you can very quickly and easily prototype a great website. Now, we've been talking in the context of like, let's build something together from scratch, but I mentioned I haven't touched a design in years. Generally what I do is I go look for a template that exists that kind of looks like what I want it to be, and then I'm going to start focusing on the back end. I'm not going to fiddle with all the front end stuff. I'm going to trust people that are better than me, people that are actually designers, have made beautiful layouts that work great on mobile browsers and phones and tablets and desktop. And I only care about the interactivity. So I'm going to spend all of my time and energy in interactivity, and let some, usually a lot of these templates, because they're built by people who are, like, if you're a front end designer, you should 100% memorize everything there is to know about Bootstrap and get super good with it. If you want to be just a front end dev, that would be an excellent use of your time. There are a few other front-end frameworks that are similar to Bootstrap. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we don't really harp on it too much, is that, you could go to a company, I don't even know all of them anymore, right? Like, back in the day before Bootstrap existed, Yahoo released one called YUI, which was Yahoo User Interface Elements, and that one was great. It gave us, like, before grids and Flexbox even existed, they gave us a bunch of the magic floats for our divs, so that we could just say, hey, this is a 3-column layout, and you would say, this is column 1, this is column 2, this is column 3, and YUI would give us all those little magic float stuffs and clears so that everything would line up correctly. This, as a developer, you're always looking for shortcuts, whatever's going to save you time, right? So that you can be faster, because working on the front end, unless you're a front end developer, is not a good use of your time. You can, if you're building Twitter, right? You want to build the simplest user interface you possibly can, so you can spend all of your time and energy on, like, what happens when you tweet? How do we notify people? All of these different components of making the system actually function are going to take 10 times more of your energy and time. But Bootstrap is a great one. What I would probably do if I was building a brand new project, maybe I'd say, free HTML Bootstrap templates. Right? And I would just go to a website like this. This is going to give me the HTML and the CSS all at once. I'm going to be like, oh, Let's look at free ones. Let's take out the pro ones.
Reshare your screen.
Oh yeah, let me. Gosh, that's gonna keep getting me. I apologize. Yeah, so I'm gonna go to startbootstrap.com or something, and I'm gonna just pick out something that looks like what I want my product to be. Right? Maybe I'm making a dashboard, and we can click on here. We can see a live preview. If we view, let's take this little frame out here. If we view source on this, right, it's still just HTML. It's still just CSS and stuff that we recognize, but it's got all these components nicely styled and laid out. So if I was going to build a product, I might just come and take a template like this and be like, oh yeah, that's pretty good, right? It's got all these buttons, everything looks nice, and then I'm going to spend all my time actually making this into a product. Like I'm still going to have to build a search engine so that when I search up here, it actually does something. Like all of that functionality, we will have to build, and so I often will just cheat the process and get there with a template. But I'm not a designer, right? These templates are made by designers, and there are people like all these templates exist because someone has created them. And then this website specifically, startbootstrap.com, but there's a bunch of these. Like there's pro versions where you can spend a couple of weeks or months designing a really beautiful user interface and then sell it to a bunch of idiots like me who want to save 8 hours of work, right? Some of these, like this pro one, let's see what this costs. $30. You sell this 10,000 times, right? This is, what is that? 30 times 2,000 something? 29 times 2429. Somebody made $70,000 building this website, right? I'm just not a designer, so this is a perfectly excellent way to, if you enjoy this kind of work. Here, this one, this is $29 too. Less sales though. Oh shoot! Oh, that's the free version. Yeah. So if I wanted to make a whatever this is, this would be like a product landing page. So if you ever had to build, something to launch a company and you had a whole bunch of different products, like this is a pretty good. Right? It's got a whole bunch of different pages in here. So if I wanted to have a pricing page, right? This would be an example of a pricing page. You've seen probably stuff like this a million times. Rather than me going and trying to fiddle with all this stuff to make it look good, I'd be like, yeah, it looks pretty good. I'm going to use this for my company and be off and running. Right? So that's what I do. And if it's using Bootstrap behind the scenes, great. If it's using one of these other, like, let's look up other CSS frameworks. Right, I'm sure there's a bunch. Yeah, Bootstrap is number one. Foundation, I've heard of this, and this one's pretty good. We were considering using this at a previous company. They all do roughly the same thing. It's just you've got to then go in and learn all of their classes, how they do things, and so it's just more stuff to learn to memorize. And in the context, like behind the scenes, it's all still CSS. It's just, do you want to learn actual CSS or do you want to learn the names of a specific framework that may or may not be one you use? But if I'm working on a hackathon project or I'm building something quick, like we were doing kind of tonight with Netflix, 100% of the time I would just go and steal one of these or go get a template and then work from there. You should definitely, in this class, after this class, play around, try things, play with frameworks, see what you like, see what you don't like. There is a lot of value in having opinions when you're working for a company, because they're going to tell you something like build a shopping cart or build a pricing page. And if you've got an idea of how you can implement that better, whether that's using Bootstrap or using a template or X, Y, and Z, like any number of iterations of what that could be, you having the knowledge, you're the subject matter expert on making things happen. You're the builder, right? Bulma, I've never heard of this one, right? These all look cool. And if I was interested in all in design or front end, I would spend lots of time looking at these things. But I am the type of person, I'm much more back-end focused. I'd rather spend time learning a brand new programming language or learning to use a different type of database. Like, I'm super good at SQL. I've been using MySQL for 25 years at this point. But if I was building something for fun, I might use like a NoSQL database, something like gosh, I don't know, what are some NoSQL databases? Or I'd, maybe try one of Amazon's special container databases or something like that, just to try something new. So if you like front end, you should sell templates, because there's you can make pretty good money doing that. What else? Any other questions? What would we like to talk about? We got like 15 minutes left, or you can leave a few minutes early. It's up to you. Australia, you've now had an extra 40 minutes to build your thing. Are you ready to show off what you built yet?
You see, I wasn't working on it, but that would have been a good idea.
I'm kidding. I'm completely kidding.
No, I can't seem to like fully get a grasp on Flexbox, so I scheduled an appointment tomorrow so we can go deeper on it. But
Sweet. Yeah.
there's something about it that's just not clicking.
Yeah, a lot of it doesn't click to me either. I just have to fiddle with it. So we'll fiddle with it together, and hopefully I can clear it up. Awesome. What else? Well, I'm going to stop the recording because I think we're pretty much at an end.